I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 17th of April, talking to Karen Strange in Casco, the Lake Sebago, is it, area of Maine in the year 2020. And we haven't laid eyes on each other for probably at least 20 some years, but you've always had a warm spot in my heart from our connection through the Mother Friendly Childbirth Initiative back there in '96 at Mount Madonna, and subsequent meetings where we met various parts of the country. So I'm here today to find out what makes you tick, who you are and why, and work in your personal history and your professional history. I see you as the sort of second generation from the really old farts that you picked up the mantle early on, and you're probably working with the third and fourth generation by now. But primarily you work with midwives, and we'll get to your work later on. But where were you born, and how did you, what birth order, siblings, what were your early years like, school, where did you do your training and all that stuff?
Okay, boy, that's going back, Jack. Let's see. So, let's see, I was born in Detroit, Michigan. You see my collar is sort of here. It's still chilly here in Maine. So
yeah, even here in
wearing
California.
long sleeves, yeah. So I was born in Detroit, Michigan, long time ago, 1954. Oh my God, that's aging me. I was the second, but I think the part that was the most important is that my mother was slightly retarded. And when she had her first baby, she was given the cocktail of drugs that most women in the 1950s, this was 1951, she was given the cocktail of drugs. So she was unconscious for the birth of her first baby. And it turns out when the baby was born, of course, it was taken away from her, which was also normal for that era, but she was unconscious. And the baby died when it was a day old, and of multiple congenital defects, none of which was anybody's fault. But she never really got to see the baby, and she never got to hold the baby. And she was told by the rabbi and the doctor to just pretend like it never happened, which was also normal for that era. And I happened to be the next baby in the womb. Let's see, 1951 to 1954, like 3 years later. And so, as I sort of got involved in pre and perinatal psychology and learning a little bit more about the baby's experience, I began to think about me being the next baby in her womb. And since she tried to follow what the doctors told her, that I actually gestated or marinated in all of my mother's unspoken sadness and grief and loss. And that just made sense to me. And I began to understand how that time in utero really impacted me. And so, that was really kind of the beginning. I became, I had a multitude of jobs, but I became a midwife in 1988. I was at a birth center that did a high volume number of births, as well as had an academic program in El Paso, Texas. I was just totally in my element. I just loved everything about supporting the body and how the body does what it knows how to do. And
let's go back, and I'm not going to skip through your childhood quite that fast. Any other siblings after you? Were you the?
Yes, I have a sister. I have a sister who lives here in Maine, and one of the reasons we moved here was to be closer to her. And she's about 2.5 years younger than me, and I think we had sort of a normal suburban upbringing, and was always involved in sort of natural processes, always.
So were you close as kids?
Yeah, we played a lot of Barbie.
Barbie
Yeah,
was-
we played a lot of Barbie, and I think we were pretty close. And then I think as like college, we kind of separated, though we stayed connected. And
so was all of your schooling in Detroit?
in Michigan,
Uh-huh.
yes, yeah, went to college in Michigan,
What college?
Eastern Michigan,
Uh-huh.
in Ypsilanti. I worked a lot in pharmacy. Worked as sort of a manager of a very high volume drugstore chain, which was a little bit different than the way it is now.
This was while you were in college or
Let me
afterwards?
see, I think it was after.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was
Well,
after, and I lived in California.
back to high school, were you like interested in health sciences or?
What was I interested in? I don't know. I don't know that I was really interested in any of that.
Was it a big high school, small school? What?
Very big. 900 was my graduating class.
Wow. Oh, I have
Yeah,
38
really big, really big. And I went to, right when I graduated, I went to Outward Bound. I remember that.
Oh, okay. How was that?
Which was very different than it is now, though. It was 3.5 weeks, so it was a pretty long period. And it wasn't just for, people that were having difficulty in life or kids that were having difficulty. Anybody could go. And I went to Colorado. It was challenging. It was really challenging for me. It was
Say more.
physically hard, and it was physically very challenging.
I'm not very familiar with Outward Bound. I've heard of it forever, but how has it changed and what was it like then? And why did you go and a few things like that?
I think I wanted to challenge myself and see if that would help me really make more contact with myself. I think I've always had sort of a little conflict with myself and how, not really sure I was capable, which probably goes back to that pre and perinatal period.
Yeah.
But so somebody I was in school with said, let's go to Outward Bound, and she decided not to go at the last minute.
Stood you up.
So now I think there's shorter periods, and a lot of people go specifically to challenge themselves. Maybe they're having a rocky teenage years. There were many different Outward Bounds. You could come here to Maine and do a lot of water. You could go to, was it Oregon or Washington? Colorado had mountains and rock climbing, which it's funny I went because I have a major fear of heights.
Oh boy.
Yeah, a lot of interpersonal challenging. You were in little groups. You had to figure out how to eat your supply of food, how you're going to support each other. Yeah. It would be very different to go now. I think now would be more fun.
And this was right after your senior year? Or?
Right after high school, 1972.
And so then you went, that was the summer, and then you went to Ypsilanti to college that fall. And what were your interests in college, major? And...
I don't even remember, Jack. I don't really remember. I think I just did the basic classes.
Your major?
General Just everything was really general. I didn't know what to do with myself. And I did not finish school at that time. I ended up coming back to Detroit, or the Detroit area. And like I said, I got a job, and I got a job just as a simple cashier at this really busy drugstore, and sort of worked my way up. And I began to sort of see my talents, and that I learned very quickly, and that I was really good working with people. And yeah, so I mean, I relatively quickly became the manager, this white woman in a very high volume, busy neighborhood in Detroit, in Detroit City. Yeah.
And then how did that morph into your interest in birth? Or did you go back?
Birth didn't come around for a long time.
Oh, okay. So
but
what are careers?
I'm not exactly sure how that all transpired, but when it was time to finally leave Detroit, oh God. Let's see, I moved to Florida. Can't believe we're dredging all of this up, but I moved to Florida, and I was really drawn to the water. And I found that the water was very settling for me. And I went to a sea school in, let's see, Stuart, Florida. It's called Chapman School of Seamanship. And so I learned about the water. I went to Louisiana, worked offshore oil boats for offshore oil boats, supply boats. Worked there for a while.
What kind of work is that? Like a roustabout?
Deckhand work, engineer assistant.
Hmm.
It was challenging. It was very challenging. Let's see. Then I moved to Florida. I actually went to Louisiana to get sea time so I could get my captain's license.
Oh.
Yeah. And then I moved to Florida and tried to get some work on sailboats and yachts. And I worked for several years on a yacht as sort of the first mate on a beautiful boat. I had all the clothes with my name on it and the name of the boat. And one of the beautiful boats I worked on was called Cardinal Sin. It was just a beautiful boat. So we did some traveling, did some work. There was a captain, there was myself. Occasionally there was a cook for this family. What else? I moved to California. And in California is sort of where I became a little more aware of my interest in natural processes. Not that I wasn't already interested. I had done a lot of fasting when I was much younger. And I was always amazed at how the body healed itself in that state. And doing some long extended fasting, I learned a lot about the body. So I was always very drawn to how do you support the body naturally. That
would have been pretty unusual in the 70s. What drew you to
It was unusual. I'm going to say it was probably 74, 75. I did 2 pretty long fasts, a 26-day fast at a place where you go to fast.
Where was that? And do you remember?
It was in Ohio. It was in Youngstown, Ohio.
Oh.
And the method was called natural hygiene.
Right, I've heard of that.
It was all very focused on how the body heals itself. And I got to meet people that had many major illnesses, and hanging out, fasting, hanging out in bed, getting sunbaths, drinking fresh water, no TV. I was with people that had, chronic illnesses that got well while I was there, and it was while they were there, and that was always amazing to me, and that was sort of my background.
You yourself didn't have any particular illness. Why did you?
I didn't. I mean, I think I had allergies, and I was a little overweight, and I wanted to lose weight, and I was having trouble with my allergies, and going. That certainly cleared all of that up. That's for sure. And then how to eat once you start eating again. You're probably familiar with food combining, kind of came from that era.
Interesting.
So when I was in California, I was working for a man that made a product called Cyclone Cider. I don't know if you've heard of it, but, and then I had, of course, friends in California that were having babies with midwives. And
Just northern or southern California?
well, let's see. I was living in Ventura and Santa Barbara, so I met Mary Jackson.
Uh-huh.
And that was, pretty amazing. And Marina Alzugaray, friend of mine, she was her midwife. And then I had a friend in San Diego. I went with her to a prenatal, and I was sort of at the end of a relationship and not really sure what to do with myself. And I went to this prenatal, and her midwife said to me, I have a friend that is committed to putting midwives out into the world, and she has a school in El Paso. You should go.
Uh-huh.
And I was at the time thinking, like, what am I going to do with myself? What am I going to be when I grow up? And I was thinking about going to naturopathic school, and I thought, oh, I'm going to check it out. And, I called, I learned a little bit about it, and I just said, I'm coming. Hold my space. She had just opened probably 6 months before. Took me probably 9 months. The end of the relationship, packed up, moved to El Paso, began school at her program. Let me see, March of 1988.
And is the school still functioning? Or is it?
It's still functioning, but I don't think it has an academic program anymore. It was sold a couple of years ago. But people came from all around the world to learn midwifery, to get a lot of hands-on skill. It was on the border. So, of course, many people came to the United States to have their babies. So, you got a lot of hands-on, and because it was on the border and because we did a high volume, we got to see a lot more than you would see in a normal home birth environment. But most of the people that trained there were then going to go and do home birth.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up staying. I worked as one of the staff midwives. I eventually worked as the clinical director till I left. It's where I became a neonatal resuscitation instructor. It happened right there because the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with this little program. Let me just see. It came out in 1987. They came to El Paso, kind of did a United States road trip, and they came to El Paso, and all the midwives from the birth center, called Maternidad La Luz, went to the hospital to take this course. And after taking the course, we were just like, oh my God, this is not how midwives practice. This is not how midwives think. This is not how we do births. And that became the impetus for myself and the owner, Deb Cayley, to become instructors so that we could teach this in how to do it in the out-of-hospital setting.
Mm.
So I didn't really teach in El Paso. It wasn't until I moved to Dallas, which is, where I met you, and that's where I started teaching. I taught locally. No great plan, just there were a lot of midwives in Texas. It was a lot of Texas. It was legal. The midwives in Dallas were incredibly well organized, and it just became the place to start teaching. One of the things that I learned as I started teaching people is I saw how much fear there was. How much fear there was around resuscitation, I began to become aware of my own fear, certainly. And then one day I was listening to New Dimensions, and I think you're familiar with New Dimensions,
Oh yeah,
Michael Toms. Yeah.
yeah. Who was he,
Well,
who was he
it,
interviewing?
yeah. So my husband and I were really addicted to that show in El Paso. We listened to it religiously. And so we went to Dallas, and in Dallas it was on at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sundays.
Yeah, they had some terrible times. Yeah.
But on this particular, and I have to say, I left El Paso feeling like I knew everything about birth. I knew everything about babies and mothers. I was the clinical director. I'd trained a lot of people. I just felt like I knew everything. And then one day I was listening to this radio show, New Dimensions, and it was Barbara Fenn Dyson, who used to be president of the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology, and Bruce Lipton were doing a presentation. Bruce Lipton, as you know, is a cellular biologist, and they were talking about the effects of maternal stress on the developing fetus. And they were just talking about how this time in utero is building the baby's brain, nervous system, and temperament, and all according to the mother's emotional world, whether she's aware of it or not. And they just, started talking about, so if you have an anxious mom or a worried mom or a fearful mom, that's all hardwiring the brain, the nervous system, and the temperament. And this is true of all mammals, right? It's preparing the baby for what life is going to be like on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm, listening to this show and thinking back to how I started the story here, because I knew a little bit about my mom being slightly retarded and having lost her first baby and me being the second baby. And it just started clicking how that really formed me. And, I really began to understand a little bit more about babies and a little bit more about the baby's experience in utero. And I became obsessed with wanting to know more because I thought I knew everything. And here they were talking about something that wasn't talked about. And after the show, I just thought, I have to know more. So I called up Barbara, who's just this lovely woman. And I said, I'm a midwife. I trained at a birth center. We did a lot of births, a high volume of births. I saw a lot of complications. I was talking really fast, which is what often happens when you have a lot of trauma. And I said, I think I have some fear around birth. And we talked for a while. And she said, Karen, I don't really think it's the fact that you've seen so many complicated births. She said, I think what's happening to you is that every time you go to a birth, especially a complicated birth, what's happening is you're stimulating your own memory, your own implicit memory, your own cellular memory of what happened at your birth. And I suggest you do some birth work. Well, I didn't know what she was talking about. I mean, I didn't have a clue, but I was like, oh, I need to know more. Oh yeah, I want to heal. That had always been my journey. Actually, that's why I went to Outward Bound, as I thought I could heal this piece inside me by challenging. So I went to her workshop, which of course was in California, Northern California. It was very long. You do a, birth regression when you get there, which was interesting, but I didn't have that shift yet. I did learn a little bit about my birth, but it wasn't until about a week into this workshop where we were doing a little afternoon of birth games, and there was like 30 people at this workshop. So there were a lot of people. I was the only birth person though, midwife. Before there was a plethora of midwives and doulas. And anyway, we were going to be stimulating birth memories, and she had this big foam mattress, big, so you could crawl through it. Everybody was going to have an opportunity to crawl through it, and you could have it tight or loose, and it's silly even thinking about it now, but I just thought, this is really weird. I'm just going to watch to begin with, because, like, how is this possible, right? So everybody was going to have an opportunity to go through and this birth canal, and you could actually choose somebody from the group to meet you and to tell you what you want said to you. And anyway, I just watched as each person took their turn. You know, they could take their time, and the twists and turns of the birth canal. And pretty quickly I noticed that people weren't talking. They were just expressing, they were emoting. And that was a little unsettling, to hear the sounds of what the baby might be experiencing. And then, you know, my midwifery brain was clicking in, and I'm looking at the baby in the birth canal thinking, well, yeah, she's stuck. Let's get the mom on hands and knees and we'll get the baby out. And like, that wasn't our job. Our job wasn't to get the baby out. Our job was to be present and hold space and watch the baby's experience. And that was very disorienting for me as a midwife, because I always saw birth from, you know, how do we resolve this problem? How do we safely get the baby out? Like, there's the journey, there's the end. And then, you know, like I said, there was about 30 people, baby, person, baby, baby, after baby, after baby. I started to get it. I started to get that there was a baby's experience of birth. And when I got it, when I saw what happened, like that babies make a decision about what happens to them in utero during the twists and turns of the birth canal, what happens to them when they come out, they make a decision about life, and they live from that decision from that point on. And when I really got that and saw it, it was catastrophically shocking to me that I did not know this. I did not know that babies really feel all of that they really have this experience. And that changed how I saw birth forever. It changed how I did birth, because I was attending birth back then. It changed how I was going to teach neonatal resuscitation, because imagine babies that have been resuscitated. What is it like for them? What is their experience? And then what is the gentlest, simplest, most appropriate thing that you can do for the baby? Right? Is it better to just keep rubbing? Is it better to suction? Is it better to ventilate? Like, I had to know. And so I started going to the Association for Pre and Perinatal conferences and meeting David Chamberlain and Tom Burney and William Emerson. And, you know, I just had to know. Ray Castellino, you know, I started doing his workshops, and Wendy McCarty, I started doing therapy with her over the phone. I just had to know more. And I had to come up with tools in my class teaching neonatal resuscitation. What is the simplest, gentlest, most appropriate thing to do? And what are things we can do to help babies, normal babies? Because even though birth is normal, it's still a really big event. Even if nothing big happens, birth is still a really big event for mother and for baby. And we all need to integrate big experiences. And so that's kind of what happened. I'll share this with you, Jack. I'll send it to you as my little simple tools for mothers. Just what are some simple things that we can do for babies? Whether they've been separated, whether there's been a major complication, but just what to do normally. And what's true for babies is true for babies inside, it's true for babies outside, it's true for teens, it's true for adults. It's all the same. It's just getting it that babies inside, babies outside, they're conscious, they're aware, they're sensitive, they're laying down memory, and we are all looking to be in connection. We're all looking to be in relationship. And so that's kind of my life work, to create, some consciousness around babies and around resuscitating babies and being with babies, wherever babies are born.
And you continued your peripatetic lifestyle. As I recall, when I met you, you were all over the place, traveling and teaching. And
I've taught about 10,000 people
wow,
around the world.
mainly midwives.
Mostly midwives, certainly, mostly midwives that do home birth, birth centers, nurses, a few doctors, a few neonatologists, doulas, students, apprentices. I've taught a lot of classes in Brazil, and I've had a lot of pediatricians and neonatologists, OBs come. They have a huge humanized birth movement there.
Really?
Yes, I also, yeah.
And so are you fluent in Portuguese or?
Well, my slides are English and Portuguese, and I have a translator.
Uh-huh. How did you make that connection to Brazil?
Well, what happened was two of their movers and shakers, before they started putting these conferences together, came to the United States, had heard about me, and took one of my classes in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And 2 years later, to put together this conference, and she brought me there and taught lots of classes, did a bunch of keynotes. They have just grown.
I'm just remembering now, there was a strong Brazil connection. Who were the people?
Ana Cris Duarte and Maíra Libertad. And the first conference I went to had 700. The last conference was 1,800.
Wow.
I was there in September, I think. 1,800 people, 60 lectures a day. I mean, there's a track for doctors, there's a track for nurses, doulas, for midwives. They're just cutting edge. I mean, just amazing how they're transforming slowly, but largely within Brazil. Yeah, they're amazing.
And did you say 16 lectures? 16?
60. 60 lectures a day. And the conference is 4 days. They did 4 days.
I thought you were saying you were doing that many.
No.
Okay.
I think I did 4. Yeah. No, I'm just and people are attending. I mean, and they're beautifully done. They're just beautifully done. Imagine a birth conference attracting 1,800 people here in the United States. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
It would be amazing. Yeah. So, I've taught in 5 countries. I think 5 countries. I'd have to do a count on the states, but I think something like 44 states.
Wow.
And I do a lot of debriefs with midwives, case review debriefs. And we go over the clinical picture. And then when we're done with that, we'll talk about how to make repair, how to do repair for babies that have had separations, challenges at birth. Because birth was set up to work, in case no one was there. I mean, really, from the beginning of time, birth works. We all just kind of showed up a lot later. But embedded in the birth sequence and the birth process is that we know how to give birth, we know how to pretty much heal. Certainly things happen and we die, and medicine can help immensely. But the human body knows how to give birth. All mammals know how to give birth. And embedded in normal birth is the repair, the natural repair that just has gotten lost over time. So my lectures on the baby's experience of birth and simple tools are just reminding what's already embedded in us. and how to facilitate that regardless of where you give birth. It's not some new neuroscience that can be explained in terms of neuroscience, but it's really basic. And when you begin to talk about it and you separate a little bit from how we've come to understand birth, the hospital and all the things to worry about, you know, just look at mammals. Fred Worth used to say to me, you know, just look at mammals. What do they do? What is for the optimal survival of their species? It's the same for us because we're mammals. We all need the exact same things,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to be close, skin to skin, especially if there has been a separation or a trauma. We must have extended skin to skin. That is the most important thing that you can do for your baby, skin to skin, and to settle, to feel safe, because your baby is you. Your baby is undifferentiated. They're undifferentiated inside you, but even when they're born, they are still you.
Yeah.
You know they're separate, but they don't. They are still your body. So what does it take to just settle? Like, I need do nothing but settle and be here. That is so healing to the baby. Babies that have had no traumas, but babies that have had traumas. And maybe it was because it was life-saving. I'm not saying that it was unnecessary. It doesn't matter the reason. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong. What all babies need is skin to skin.
Mm-hmm.
Unlimited, extended.
And how rare that is.
Yeah.
When I discovered I was a touch junkie when in therapy in my 30s, and realized how skin deprived. And now we're having this isolation with the virus pandemic, and people are going stir crazy because they're not getting even the minimal dosage. You know, we used to talk about 4 hugs a day was the MDR in the 70s, but some people think it's more like 12. And I struggle to even get 4. It's our culture, you know, compared to the Latin cultures where there's so much more touch. It's sad how the Northern European cultures have completely denied this basic mammalian need, and starting with birth.
I remember hearing Deepak maybe 10 years ago, maybe more than that, because I'm sure his parents have passed, but how he said when he goes back to visit his parents in India, they still all sleep in the same bed.
Mm.
You know, and he was a full adult. And I just thought, oh my God, most of us can barely stand to be in the same house with our parents.
Yeah. So we know we met at Mount Madonna, but I'm wondering if, because I got to Mount Madonna from being at the AAHP, pre and perinatal, I'll pronounce it, meeting
Appa.
in 95, where I met Jim Prescott, and Bruce Lipton was there too. That's where he met Margaret.
Oh,
At that meeting in San Francisco?
I'm pretty sure I was at most of those. Is that the one where Bruce fell off the stage talking?
I don't think so, no.
Oh,
I've heard about that, and he acted like nothing had happened.
nothing had happened. Talking, doing this great job of explaining, and boom. And then he keeps talking, climbs back on, and then it was just.
That's Bruce, yeah, no. There wasn't a stage. I was on a panel with David
Chamberlain.
Chamberlain. That was my first introduction to pre and perinatal. I met Marilyn Milos there.
Milos.
Who else? Michael Mendiza, and of course Jim Prescott, who that radically, I'd read the continuum concept and I was aware of Jean's work, but Prescott had the science behind it, and
Right.
that was a turning point in my career. And then Jim invited me to Mount Madonna, where I met Suzanne. The 3 of us were roommates. We were last minute people, and they didn't have room for us on campus, so we were across the road in a house or something like that. And
Did you ever sleep? With a group like that, would anybody
Yeah.
go to sleep?
Well, but Suzanne and I wound up in a hot tub together, and we cooked up the idea of of our what eventually became the Alliance for Transforming the Lives of Children, which we thought, well, this is great for birth, but what about getting all the different organizations together, pre and peri and post, and all the parenting organizations. It took me 3 years to organize it, but that was cooked up in the hot tub with Suzanne there, along with Jim.
Yeah, that's Suzanne for sure. Suzanne Arms, yeah.
Yeah, and we have a monthly
Meeting.
uh, Zoom meeting where it's the connection with Ray Castellino's part of it, Robin Grill in Australia, and Ellie Taylor, and a bunch of folks. We just had our meeting a couple of days ago, and you might be interested in joining that. But
Yeah.
support each other. So big change in your life, and you have continued your travels. Are you slowing down any now that you're up there in Maine? And also,
Well, yeah, go on.
also you mentioned you ended a relationship, but then there was a husband somewhere in Texas. What kind of personal life? And did you have any babies? What's your?
I did not have any babies. I met my husband in El Paso. He came with 4 boys, so
Oh wow!
I didn't think, oh, let's have more children to make us a family. And
How old were the boys?
let's see, when we got married, they were 7, 11, like 15 and 16.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was a handful.
And did you have full time or part time or?
Well, we had one, and then they all moved in for a while, and then my mother moved in with us, and you know, I was working at the birth center 3 24-hour to 34-hour shifts a week, and yeah, it just wasn't the time to be having babies. So,
Yeah.
and then I got old eggs, and they're just when they all eventually moved out, and then my mother had Alzheimer's. She lived with us for quite a few years, 8.5 years, and that was a very tormented, tortured journey, her descent into Alzheimer's for sure. So, and then eventually she passed, and we moved to Colorado and lived in beautiful Colorado. Loved Colorado.
Boulder, or?
We were, well, we were in Lafayette outside of Boulder, and then eventually lived in Littleton. And I had been taking Myrna Martin's foundation training, the same that Ray offers, but also started the biodynamic cranial sacral training, which I have to say really informed and formed how I taught neonatal resuscitation, and gave me much more awareness and understanding of the autonomic nervous system and what happens with trauma, and how to self-regulate, co-regulate, lecture, tracking my audience, and how to keep my audience regulated, especially around a very stimulating topic that I teach, which is neonatal resuscitation. That brings up everybody's fears. You just mention it, and because like I said at the beginning, I noticed there was a lot of fear. I didn't know what to do with it. I just noticed it. And so I kept changing how I taught the class, because I really wanted people to understand what was happening for babies that needed help with breathing, and to teach the simplest, gentlest, least traumatic way to support a newborn at birth. So my biodynamic cranial sacral training with John and Anna Chitty, I have to say, like, they really transformed my world, and getting a little more understanding of polyvagal theory and Stephen Porges's work. So that was huge. And I did a lot of trainings there, did a lot of sessions with Anna and John, who passed last year, but
Yeah,
just taught so much on babies, how to be with babies. Being with Babies is the name of one of his books. Just if anybody gets a chance to go on YouTube and watch anything that John does, was just amazing. So, and Kate White. So these are all people that really have informed what I do. I still travel. I'm trying to get more online, and I can see that COVID is really supporting me, letting me get my nervous system and sleep regulated, and create a different way of doing what I do, because I think I was a little over-traveled. And as you know, as you get older, it's a little harder to recuperate afterwards, and just to be able to reach more people. So do a little more online.
And you and your husband still together?
Yeah, yeah, he's downstairs right now.
And
Yeah.
the four sons, are they producing?
Well, I have 3 grandchildren. One son is in Colorado. The other 3 are in Texas. And I have 3 grandchildren. So let me see, they're 8, 7, 8, and 13. Yeah. I don't get to see them much, but
Yeah.
And
the decision to move to Maine, was it due to your sister being there, or what?
My sister lives here, so one was to live here and to live a little bit more out in nature, because we're really out in nature. We live basically at a marina. Very quiet, even in the summer. Very clean. So a cost in living drop, and to be closer to family. Though it has made traveling a little harder, because flying out of Maine in the winter is challenging.
Yeah, but you're back on the water again, and
yeah. Well, it's not the ocean, and I'm glad about that. And I don't know whether you know, but I'm a big animal fan. So I have a dog, and we just got a little kitty since lockdown from the Humane Society. So if you're looking for stuff to do, guys, this is the time to get a puppy, get a kitten, get a cat. Yeah. So that brings me great joy.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So where do you see things headed? What are your words of wisdom for future generations?
For future generations, the key is, let's take our little lesson here and slow down and see what it takes to be present ourselves. There's so much resource out there, even though some of it's on Zoom. There's so much resource, and yeah, I would say let's learn about the consciousness of babies. Where do we come from? What makes us who we are? Slow down to be present with babies inside and babies outside. Talk to babies, babies inside, babies outside. Ourselves, slow down. Can we notice how we feel inside ourselves? What do I need to do to slow myself down? How do I remember to do that? You know, I use little Post-its, I stick them up. Sometimes I set my clock on my alarm on my iPhone. It's a little bit easier now that running around isn't so easily available, and my intention is to take that into the world. I mean, it's already incorporated in what I teach. Whenever I lecture, I actually wish midwifery was taught right from the beginning, with a little pause, a little breath, getting present before we learn anything, present before we're with our clients, present before we do our skills, before we palpate, acknowledge the baby, talk to the baby. name when we're not doing okay. Name it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's been so helpful in my process to name when I'm not doing okay. It's not that there's something wrong with me. I mean, can I slow down and feel what that feels like? And sometimes when I do that, often when I do that, it shifts.
Hmm. Well, wise words to wrap up with. Thank you.
Mm.
It's
Well,
been great.
Jack, thank you so much for making the time and
Well,
for connecting with me. I've missed you. I think I saw you at one APA a while ago.
yeah,
Berkeley.
yeah. Well, we got to stop meeting like this. But you're about as far away as you can get from where I am, and then I'm in Australia half the year too. So
I know.
uh,
Yeah.
come on down, teach in Australia.
I would love to. I would definitely love to. And I have a gathering down there, so I just need to make it happen. But you're here for a while, right?
Yeah, until November. I'll presumably get to go back. We don't know what's going to happen with world
Right.
travel. So
Right. And when I'm in Northern California, which I'm not sure where it's going to be because everything's been moved out, but I'm supposed to be there this summer. So I'll see you this summer.
oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, and
Thank
blessings
you.
on you. Okay, I'm going to end the recording.